Hey, Senator, thanks for being here. Your first question is coming from the audience, and she's right in front of you.
Great, hi.
Hey, my name is Aubrey Berger.
Hi, Aubrey.
For over 15 years at the local area agency on Aging Connections,
Uh-huh.
helping older Iowans to find supportive services like safe housing. I've witnessed the heartbreak of a mother whose adult son beat her, belittled her.
Just wait, we'll wait.
All right, I've witnessed the heartbreak of a mother whose adult son beat her, belittled her, and took all of her money so she couldn't pay her rent. Elder abuse, like domestic violence and child abuse, can happen anywhere, across all the classes. Millions of older Americans fall victim to abuse, including neglect and financial exploitation, every year. As Americans live longer and our population ages, what will you do to increase elder supportive and protective services so people can get the help they need when they need it?
Thank you so much. That's a wonderful question. I appreciate your asking it. You know, let me start by saying I've been in this fight before for a long time. When I had the chance following the financial crash to get in and fight for a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau so that financial institutions couldn't build their business models around cheating people, the ultimate goal of that was to get a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, something everyone told us we couldn't get done, but we got in that fight, we built a grassroots movement, supported it, and we now have a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And that little bureau has been out there on behalf of vulnerable seniors. There is an office that is explicitly on this question of targeting and exploiting seniors financially. And I think that's what we need at the federal level. They uncover the scams on reverse mortgages. They uncover the scams that are directly targeted, the telephone scams, to seniors and fight back so there's someone on their side. In fact, I should say to everyone here and anyone who's listening, there's a complaint hotline at the CFPB. It's very easy to use. You go to CFPB.gov. If you have a complaint, you can fill it out, and the chances are very good you'll get a response. That agency has handled about 1.5 million complaints and helped people. But the second thing it does is it means it's collecting information about the bad actors. And that helps them on the enforcement side. So that's a part of it. It's also a part of it when we talk about the importance of our state attorneys general and our Department of Justice. To listen to seniors and to come in and fight back when they are being abused, whether it's systematically or whether it's just one-off with a family member. Seniors have got to know they've got someone on their side. A third part I want to mention is about economics, because I think it matters to everyone. And that is, we need not to cut Social Security, we need to expand Social Security in this country. When people can be financially independent, it gives them a little more protection, a little more opportunity to reach out to others. And I also have a housing plan that would help build about 3.2 million new housing units in America, in urban areas, in small towns, in rural America, all across this country. And a chunk of that money is set aside so that we can do senior housing. So seniors have a chance for as long as they want to live independently, to be able to age in place. I think that's a critical part of what we do. For me, it's all about having the right infrastructure in place, because all of these come down to a single question. Who does government work for? We have a government right now that just works great for the rich, for the wealthy, for the well-connected. It's just not working for much of anyone else. We have a government that works great for giant drug companies, just not for people who are trying to get a prescription filled. We have a government that works great for investment advisors, just not for people who are trying to protect their lifetime savings. We need a government that's not just on the side of those who can hire armies of lobbyists and lawyers, those who have lots of money. We need a government that's on the side of the people. That's why I'm in this race. I believe in 2020, we can make that happen.
Okay, Senator, thank you.
Thank you.
Your Medicare for All proposal would eliminate private insurance, correct? Is that right?
What it does is it transitions people to more complete insurance coverage, more complete health care coverage at a lower cost, which I think is what we all want. Everyone gets covered, but we do it at the lowest possible cost.
Would that also include Medicare Advantage and Medicare Part D, which have private providers of that insurance within the Medicare umbrella?
So the basic structure of the plan is to get everyone covered. And by the way, for people who already have Medicare, a significant feature of Medicare for All is that it pays for long-term care, both long-term care in a facility and long-term care at home. It's about health care from our babies to our seniors so that no one has to go bankrupt over a medical problem. The problem we've got right now in the United States is that the insurance companies are sucking value out of our healthcare system. I mean, look at the basic business model. It's charge the maximum amount you can in premiums and pay out the least that you can in healthcare coverage. And last year, following exactly that model, insurance companies sucked $23 billion in profits out of the system, and that's before you even count the tens of millions that they paid the corporate CEOs, how much people had to spend on time, on paperwork, and hours fighting with insurance companies. So what I'm looking for is how we get maximum coverage of all our healthcare costs at the minimum price for everyone.
You mentioned Social Security in your answer
Yes.
to our audience question. Expanding it, does that mean expanding who's eligible, or does that mean expanding the monthly benefit?
So there's some expansion on who's eligible, but the principal part is to expand the monthly benefit, particularly for those who count on Social Security. Look, I am co-chair of the Expand Social Security Caucus. I've been in this argument for a long, long time. And the reason for it, for me, is not just economic, it's moral. After a lifetime of hard work, people are entitled to retire with dignity. And that means a Social Security payment every month that will actually support someone, that it really covers their basic expenses. It also means a Social Security system that is financially solvent, and that means we're going to raise revenues, but solvent not just for this generation, but so that our children can count on it and our grandchildren can count on it. We face a retirement crisis in this country, and that means more than ever. We need to strengthen Social Security. It is the bedrock of the promise that as Americans we made to each other, and that is, if you get hit with a disability, or when you're a senior and don't work any longer, you can count on a retirement with dignity, and that's what my commitment to Social Security is all about.
You mentioned revenues.
Yes.
You proposed essentially eliminating the cap on the payroll
right.
tax.
Phasing it
Everybody
out.
today is at $133,000 a year. How is that politically possible?
So it's politically possible when we ask how many people in America believe in Social Security and recognize we have to make the changes financially. You know, I like to remember about Social Security. When it got started back in the 1930s, we thought we had it locked in and who was covered and so on. And then things change over time. More women go to work. The number of occupations that are covered by Social Security expands, as it should. People live longer. And so year by year, every few years, the Social Security Administration, with the approval of Congress, would just keep making small adjustments. The amount, the insurance rate, the payment rate would go up a little bit. The fees would go up just a little bit so that it would stay level, so the Social Security system would have plenty of money. I think it's the case that there were about 38 changes in Social Security from the 1930s until the late 1980s. And then in the late 1980s, the Republicans said no more. We're just not going to make any changes. But people kept changing what they did. People lived longer. The needs were changed. Disability changed. People with disabilities. So what we've got to do, and every year that goes by that we don't make an adjustment, the adjustment will get bumpier. It will get harder. But the notion right now that people who are making $25,000 a year should be subsidizing people who make $250,000 a year, so that the people on lower income are paying a much bigger fraction of their income than those who make more money, is just wrong. And so here's how I see this. How do you get it done? You get it done by getting people across this country engaged in these issues. You get it done through organizations like AARP. Folks who show up and say, this is an issue that matters to me. And when we have enough people doing that, it matters. And you know how I can tell you that's true? When I first got to Congress, I was first elected to the Senate in 2012. So I'm sworn in 2013. And you go back and look, the principal conversation that had been going on was, how much do we cut Social Security, right? One group was saying, cut Social Security by a lot. Others were saying, cut Social Security only by a little. And then there were some progressives who were saying, oh my gosh. And when we started standing up and fighting back with outside groups like AARP, raising it in our own Democratic caucus, I insisted on a vote on the floor of the United States Senate. All of a sudden, we got more people saying, yeah, I'm there for Social Security. And so now the discussion has shifted from how much to cut over to, nobody's talking about that anymore. They're talking about where to expand and how it is that we find the right ways to bring the revenues to make sure that that happens. I believe in democracy.
Senator, another issue that
Sure.
matters a lot to these folks is the cost of prescription drugs.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of proposals on the table to how to get generics to the market faster or deal with high prices. But you've proposed that the government actually get in the business of
Right.
manufacturing some of these jobs. Why is that a better idea than some of the other ideas on the table?
So look at how it is on drugs right now. You know what the basic deal was supposed to be. The United States would promise a drug company that if you'll get out there and do the R&D, we'll give you a period of time, say 6 years, that you can be the exclusive manufacturer of it. You'll make your profits then. And then it will go to generic. And that means anybody can jump in and manufacture it, and the price is going to go down like a rock. And basically the price will just cover what are the ingredients and labor costs to get this done, and the price will be way down. That's what was supposed to happen. That is not what has happened in America. So right now, about 90% of all prescriptions would be eligible as generic drugs. Insulin, anybody? High blood pressure medicine, cholesterol medications, allergy medicines, all of those would be generic. Shoot, insulin's been around, what, nearly 100 years now? And yet the drug companies have found 100 different ways, we could talk about it, to keep those markets from working. 40% of the generics market has either 0 or 1 manufacturer. 60% is only up to 2 manufacturers. This is not a market that's working. So here's my proposal on that. If we've got a market that's not working, like the market for insulin, then the federal government ought to come in and just do a contract and say, we will contract with a company to produce generic insulin, and then we're going to turn around and make it available to the American people at cost plus. We do that a few times, and boy, the cost of prescription drugs goes down, and a whole bunch of drug companies who've been finagling around in the generics market suddenly see that their plan doesn't work anymore. So that's one way we can bring down costs.
Why do you think that's a better idea than, say, Vice President Biden proposed that if companies are raising their prices more than the rate of inflation after that patent period, that you just say, hey, you're not going to have the market for covering under Medicare and Medicaid. You're not going to have that government market anymore. And by the way, we're going to raise your taxes.
So look, if you're asking the question, should we negotiate with the drug companies? I'm all in on that. Of course we should negotiate prescription prices with the drug companies. I'm just trying to add a little more muscle behind that negotiation. I'm for it. Should we be able to import drugs from foreign countries, so long as they meet the safety standards here in the United States. You bet we should be able to import those drugs. There are a lot of ways we can go at this, and for companies that have the 10% that are still in the period of complete patent protection on their drugs, yeah, then if somebody is charging a price right through the roof, we have the capacity as the federal government to say no. We'll let the contract and let somebody else make it so that everybody gets access to these drugs. You know, but this was the point I was starting with. The reason we have a problem with drug prices in America is not because of the science. It's not because we don't understand it. It's because the drug companies are paying the pipers in Washington and they call the tunes. We have a Washington right now that works great for drug companies, and they are spending big money on campaign contributions, on lobbyists, on bought and paid for experts, on think tanks, on advertising to keep things just as they are. What we need most in this country is some courage to take on the giant drug companies and say no more of this.
Senator, there are tens of millions of Americans who are either caring full-time or part-time for a loved one in the home. You and Iowa Senator Joni Ernst have co-sponsored a Credit for Caregivers Act, which I believe is about $3,000 a year, but it's related to expenses.
Yes.
How do you compensate caregivers who've given up a job or they can only work part-time?
I appreciate the question. The way I think of this is I really wanted to do a bipartisan bill here to acknowledge home caregivers, people who in their families are taking care. You know, I just want to say off to the side, my Aunt Bee, who came and moved in with us and helped take care of our children for 16 years, before she did that, she took care of my grandmother for about a decade. And there was no compensation, there was no help. Aunt Bee and my grandmother and my Uncle Stanley were all struggling to pitch together their Social Security checks to make this work. So what I want to do is I want to create the wedge, and that's how I think of it. Let's get in the door with credit for expenses for home healthcare workers, for people who are taking care of someone at home. And let's think about the other ways that we can help make that work, because here's my view of this. A lot of folks say, how are we going to pay for this? We can't afford it. The answer is it's a much cheaper way to provide loving care for those who need it. And the idea that all of us would help support that. Right now, all of us pay when someone ends up in a nursing facility. 2 out of every 3 seniors who's receiving nursing home care is getting it from Medicaid, something that all of us pay our taxes to make happen. And I support that strongly. But there are other ways that people can receive care that are both not as expensive and, for many of them, will be care that is closer to the kind of care they want. So that's where I start, but it's not where I stop.
Yeah, while we're talking about long-term care,
Sure.
People who are not lucky enough to have an Aunt Bee or if they're too ill to be cared for in the home, are facing a big expense at the end, at the end of their working life, when they're already on fixed income, $100,000 perhaps for long-term care. How does your plan help people with those expenses? And are we putting too much reliance on for-profit nursing homes in this process?
So right now, as you know, this is what Medicaid is all about. And I want to remind everybody in this audience that I was standing on the floor of the Senate, along with a bunch of other people, just about 2 years ago now, not quite 2 years ago now, when the House voted to roll back health care for tens of millions of Americans. And some of you may remember, after the Republicans voted unanimously to do that, they high-fived each other. But they did something else in the middle of that didn't get a lot of attention. They not only rolled back the Affordable Care Act in the House, voted to do that, all of them voted for it. They also voted at the same time to take a big bite out of Medicaid, on the notion that nobody would notice if you cut Medicaid. Because who is Medicaid about? Someone else, not you. And so when I've been doing town halls, when we talk about health care, one of the things I always try to talk about is who receives Medicaid. Yeah, and I'll just ask in here, anyone have a niece or grandchild who was born who needed $1 million in medical bills in the first few weeks? Even if people had full health care coverage, full insurance, it's Medicaid that comes in and does all the special breathing tubes and the occupational therapist and gives all the help so that baby has a chance to be able to make it. Anyone have a beloved friend or child or neighbor who had mental health issues? If they got medical care, the odds are good that it was Medicaid that came in and paid for their access to care. And then for people who outlive their savings and end up in nursing homes and can't pay for it, 2 out of every 3 people in nursing homes counts on Medicaid to be able to pay the bills. I'm a strong supporter of Medicaid because we don't know whose beloved grandchild needs $1 million in medical bill, and all that goes with that, because we don't know whose good friend has mental health issues and needs help, and we don't know whose grandma outlives her savings and needs help. So for me, Medicaid is one of the best examples of who we are as Americans, about our values. That we say, we don't know who it's going to be, but we're all going to pitch in some money now so that if it's your family or your cousin or you, that we're all going to be there to make sure that everyone gets the health care they need. Medicare for All, in its new expanded version, is just the extension of that, to say it's there for everyone. Because I have to underline it again, it's about maximum coverage, good health care coverage for everyone at the lowest possible cost.
This may be the last question.
Okay.
In 2016, you gave a speech and you said 1/3 of the Americans who have access to high-speed broadband aren't using it because it's too expensive.
Yeah.
Access to high-speed broadband is an issue which AARP cares about. Would you, as president, impose price controls?
So look, I think we have to think of this much more like a public utility. You know, and that's both in terms of making sure that we get coverage. Gosh, we have parts of this country, big parts of this country, where there is no access to high-speed broadband. And you know we're about to go to 5G, and the question will be, are there going to be the slow lanes and the fast lanes? Will there be people who have a little coverage and people who don't? And here's why it matters. It matters for 2 reasons. The first one is, think back to not quite 100 years ago, back during the Great Depression. About 10%, I'll do it this way, about 90% of Americans that lived in cities had electricity. Only about 10% of people who lived in rural areas had it. We said as a country, doing this through private companies is just not going to work. So we're going to make sure that everybody gets coverage. And why? Because you can't participate in a 20th century economy if you don't have electricity. Now it's the 21st century economy. And I think this is what we do together. We build that infrastructure in the same way we build roads, we build schools. We need to make sure that everyone has communications infrastructure, and that means everyone gets access.
Thank you, Senator. Let's give you just 30 seconds if you'd like to just wrap up.
Sure. So I want to say a very special thank you to AARP. We go way, way back. I've spent a big chunk of my life studying why families go broke. And a big part of that is about understanding it by age groups. And AARP helped fund a big part of my initial research that helped me get a better understanding of what's going wrong in this country. And for me now, all the pieces intersect at just one place. And that is, we got a lot of folks out there doing their best every single day, really working hard, but a government that keeps working for a smaller and smaller group, a government that works. We go way, way back. She said that. Yeah. But I'll just say, a government that works for those at the top. And it's about what that does to our economy and what that does to our democracy. I think 2020 is our big chance to get out there and fight for a government, fight for an economy, and fight for a country that works for all of us. So thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much. That was great. Thank you. Good to see you.